Little Red's Adventures, a short story series by Jaidwing. Story 2, Gentleness of a Sister. Chapter 2. Little Red was a big cuddler for his size. He didn't allow Zan'to any space for herself while she tossed and turned throughout the night. All the moving she did. He managed to not get squished by her as if he knew when she was going to move. When she woke up, she discovered Little Red was holding onto her face with an iron grip. She spat out the small foot that was basically in her mouth and she carefully moved, so she didn't wake him. He looked so precious to her and couldn't help but scoop him up and hold him as if he were suckling. She looked at the time that was displayed over the door. Seeing it was too early to be getting up, even for her, she laid back down with her little brother in her arms and rubbed his face. He instinctively leaned into her touch while half asleep and grabbed her arm with his tiny soft hands. She purred in a soothing manner as she laid on her side. Keeping Little Red close to her body, she missed snuggling with her own pups. But they were all grown now. They were all honorable hunters. Her little brother seemed very happy to be held even at his age. Most who are of his age don't like being touched, or are rebellious to the gentle touch of a mother, father or family member at such a young age. One was already trying to prove themselves. But Little Red, she noticed, didn't rebel or stray away like of his age. He was more dependent on his mother, and very shy towards other members of the clan. If he didn't know them that well, this is what she noticed while the times being around him though. She also noticed how he liked to know how technology is made, or how it works, what it does and why it does the things that it can do.
We need more curious little ones like you in the clan,
she thought to herself. Her self-soothing purrs began to put her back to sleep and so she drifted away to slumber once more. Hours later, again she was woken up to the iron grip of Little Red. This time he had clung to her neck. His arms were wrapped around her. His face was nuzzled between her chin and her collarbone and his body laid at the center of her. She glanced at the time as she moved a hand to his back, gently patting him awake. She had overslept by 2 hours. Something she hasn't done in a long time, but since she had nowhere to be in a timely manner, she wasn't worried. This moment, it reminded her of when she had triplets and was exhausted all the time. By her luck, it was also when she was a first-time mother. Little Red slowly woke up and yawned. He rubbed away the sleepiness from his eyes and looked up at the black and glossy serpent-like familiar face.
Your breath stinks,
he mumbled as he rolled off of her. She chuckled and sat up. She stretched, hopping her back and groaning with pleasure as she felt all her muscles loosen up.
You're like Mama,
he observed. She looked down at him.
How so?
You pop.
She let out a small laugh.
It's because I'm getting old, just like Mama. When you get old, you'll pop too.
She pinched at his face in a playful manner.
You need to wash up. You were a little stinky from yesterday.
She got off of the large bed and opened the room's door.
Your breath is stinky from last night's meal,
he said with a little sass as he followed her out of the room.
Well, it seems like we both need to be a bit less stinky then.
She was amused with his daring tone, but she knew it would cause him trouble if it wasn't corrected. She led him to the bathing room to get washed up before their morning meal. He wanted a bath, so she had to supervise him just to make sure he didn't make a mess everywhere while he cleaned himself. But it didn't go as planned. The both of them ended up splashing water at each other and soaking the whole floor. She then had to chase him around with a towel in her hands because he refused to dry off. She eventually caught the little slippery eel and rubbed him dry with the towel, tickling him and keeping him distracted as she made sure to get every spot of him. Both of them were laughing the entire time. Once he settled down, she made him get his clothes on and she made the both of them breakfast. While eating, Mamba began to call, which alerted her through her gauntlet, so Zan'to put the call through.
Good morning, Mother.
Zan'to greeted.
Good morning. How is everything going?
Black Mamba sounded like she had just woken up.
It's going good. I had to give Red a bath because he stank this morning.
She chuckled at the recent memory of how much of a goofball the little pup is.
Oh, I bet that was fun.
Mamba knew very well how Little Red was with baths.
Mama.
Little Red spoke while his mouth was still full of food.
What is it, my little sweetheart?
Then Guan says I am very smart for my age.
That is true. You are. Don't you already know this?
I do. I just wanted you to know.
He had a little smile on his face. Mamba gave a little chuckle.
Keep learning whatever you can, my son, and don't stop. Ask as many questions as you can while your sister is teaching you. She knows many things I don't, for sure, I know.
Little Red nodded as Mamba let out a yawn.
I am going to get ready for the day now. You two have fun. There's a ceremony going on today, and I have been chosen to supervise. Overly eager unbloods. Yay for me.
She said the last bit with sarcasm.
Oh, sounds fun.
Guan also remarked with sarcasm. Mamba said her goodbyes and ended the call, once they finished up their food. Guan checked up on the ship's course.
11 more days.
She uttered under her breath. She wondered how she'd keep her brother entertained for the 11 days there, and the 12 days back. She doesn't have enough fuel to make any hyperjumps. Even though it would be preferable, the planet was just too far off, since there was no friction in space. She only had to set the desirable speed and let her ship glide through space, saving fuel, and only it being used to move out of the way of incoming objects, landing or taking off from a planet. Once she was done checking up on the course and the state of her ship, she turned to Little Red, who had been watching her with intense curiosity.
What do all of those do?
He had his head cocked to the side. While looking at the large control panel, Guan picked him up and placed him on her lap.
All of these do many different things that are important for the ship.
She explained to him what everything did, in detail too. And it seemed he understood every word of what she said, as always. He asked many questions and she did her best to answer. Any time she interacted with him, she never spoke down to him. She treated him as if he was a young blood. She noticed how Mamba did that with him, so she followed her lead. And since he was talked to as if he were older, he understood more. Once all questions had been asked, he leapt off of her lap and grabbed her hand, wanting her to explain what the other controls are on. The ship did. She wanted to give him a bit of a challenge. So she started using bigger words, using the technical terms for parts. To see if he would catch on. He did catch on pretty quick, but still would ask the meaning of the words. They spent the majority of the day going around the ship, with him asking many questions, and her answering them the best she could. She only knew the basics and a little more. By the end of the day, Guan had talked so much that her throat felt sore and dry. During their evening meal, Guan sat quietly as she ate while Little Red talked to her about what he really wanted to start learning how to do, make technological inventions. She could tell he was really passionate about it. She didn't have the knowledge, but she knew someone who did. Cup. She didn't know if Little Red has spent much time with Cup, but she assumed that to have since Red was so interested in tech. Once they were done with their meal, they checked in with Black Mamba and headed off to bed. Little Red still had much energy in him, but Guan was tired.
Sissy?
Little Red rested his chin on her shoulder and looked at her. Her eyes were closed, and she didn't move.
I'm not tired yet. Can you tell me a story?
She rolled from her side to her back.
What kind do you want to hear?
He sat up.
Your first hunt.
Oh.
She chuckled and sat up too.
It was disastrous. My hunting mates were way too eager to go on our first hunt, and I was a bit too eager as well.
She began to tell him how her first hunt went. Even though she was tired, she roughhoused with him since he had energy. When he started to tire out, she stopped, and they both passed out once they closed their eyes. Even though Guan was asleep, her mind was still very much active. Her thoughts became images that moved and danced around in her head. They were all a blur at first, but they began to take form. It was crowded. There were many Yautja shouting, all of which were facing the same direction. She turned to look what they were yelling at, but she couldn't see. There were too many in her way. She tried her best to move through the crowd to get a better view, but she kept being pushed to the side or even further back.
Kill the tainted blood.
A voice said from right next to her. Another shouted.
He doesn't deserve to live.
Dangwon was confused. She stopped trying to push through the crowd. Instead, she looked at her surroundings. They looked so familiar to her. She then immediately knew where she was. She was in the Ancient's courtroom. She has been here many times before to oversee cases of bad bloods being persecuted for their crimes against Yautja traditions and culture. This felt very different to her though. This didn't feel like a normal case of judgment and punishment. She knew she had to see who was up at the stand. The shouting continued as she climbed up one of the pillars of the building and jumped onto the balcony that was also packed with other Yautja. But now, she could finally see who was at the stand. Her heart sank as she saw the being that was beaten and held by the arms of two large elites. She didn't want to believe what she was seeing was true.
Zan'to, it can't be.
She uttered to herself. She was in shock at the sight of her little brother at the stand. Suddenly, someone touched her shoulder. The room grew silent so quickly and unnaturally.
You're not supposed to be here.
She couldn't turn to see who was talking to her. She was stuck and couldn't move, just as if she was paralyzed. Dangwon gasped as she jolted awake. Her heart was racing and her first instinct was to see if her brother was still here. Zan'to was sleeping peacefully at her side, which relieved her. She then looked at the time. It was around 2 a.m. She looked up at the ceiling. Her heart was still racing from the terrifying dream she just had. Though, it didn't feel like a dream. It felt so real to her. If that really was Little Red up on the stand. He looked much older. He looked more like a young blood or blooded hunter. She took a deep breath in and exhaled. She then scooped Little Red up and held him very close to her as she drifted back to sleep. Hey, I'm gonna be here for a while. So why not check out my social medias? Also, you may recognize my art. I'm Nomad's main artist. If you like my art, you can support me and my work. My commissions are always open and you can find me in the Nomad clan server as Big Papa. Alright, time to head off. See you next time.